Welcome to this presentation on how to fill out the first of several COBie forms you'll need to use on this project. This video is intended for contract admin or office engineering staff who typically package product data submittals. Let's begin first by asking, what is COBie? COBie is an acronym for the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. COBie is a U.S. national BIM standard and IFC model view definition that can be found in contracts throughout the world, including the one you're using right now. While a lot of technical information is available about COBie, the most important thing for you to know about COBie right now is that it's a format for the exchange of construction handover information. COBie data is the information needed by the facility manager to operate, maintain, and manage their building. Answered another way, COBie is just a list of equipment in the building, where that equipment is located, and how to operate the equipment. Now, we've already delivered that on almost every building project we've ever seen, right? So what's so special about COBie? Well, the real value of COBie is that it can be used to replace almost everything in this expensive mess of paper documents that we typically hand over. So now let's talk about what it takes to transform that mess of paper into standard data. There are lots of different ways to do it. Many times people just wait until the end of the project and hire someone to rekey that information. But there is another way, a way that captures COBie data when it's first delivered on a project, and a way that uses standard contract administration processes. That way requires COBie Form. Here are several examples of the kinds of forms suppliers, subcontractors, and contractors fill out on construction projects almost every day. You really don't need to know too much about COBie to deliver that COBie data. You just use the form. Today, each of these forms is done differently on almost every project. This means there's no real way to streamline contract administration. Then we deliver that information at the fiscal closeout of the contract, long past the time when the owner actually needs it. COBie forms allow you to capture this information once, when the information is first created, and provide accurate as installed data throughout the entire construction process. So what will you learn today? Today we'll learn about the COBie-based Transmittal form to help you complete it. Once you have that information, it can be used for COBie, of course, but it can also be used to ensure that everyone has the correct set of information for quality control, quality assurance, and coordination purposes. Plus, when you get to the end of the project, you won't have to replace a bunch of broken ceiling tiles caused by those people trying to get the information from the as-installed equipment. One way to look at COBie forms is to see how they map onto the contract admin process in general. Virtually every type of equipment installed on every building goes through the same basic process as shown here. The first step in the process is selecting the product. So the Transmittal form is the first COBie form you'll use. If you're wondering what a COBie form looks like, the answer is easy. A COBie form is just a spreadsheet version of the form that you're already used to using. COBie forms can be customized to include your company's logo or reflect slight differences in where things are placed on different owners' forms. When you send the form to the owner, they can take it as is as a spreadsheet, or if they require, you can print out paper copies and send those. Therefore, subcontractors and contractors can use COBie forms without needing anyone else on the team to adopt electronic signature processes. As we begin, let's look at the major sections of this form. The first major section of the form is the form header. The form header contains the address information and information used to track the form within a submittal log. If that information is already in COBie, then the COBie form generator program ensures that you won't have to type any of that information ever again. Since the form we're seeing came from a real project, the example information shown in this figure was redacted. The section at the bottom and to the right of the form is where the action on each element of the transmittal is noted. The options available are automatically provided as drop-downs in the COBie form. Now we zero in on the real content of this COBie form. The highlighted region lists each of the product types and the submittals required. The list of products and submittals is generated directly from the COBie design file. You will only need to change it if you add or remove different types of products or submittals during construction. Since changes do happen a lot, most of this video is how to update the form to reflect those changes. Before we get started, we need to address a key topic. That topic is the electronic submittal, file size, and content. Today, if we have electronic submittal information, it's often one large PDF file containing lots of information that may be relevant to the supplier or subcontractor, but not to the facility manager. In COBie forms, each file provided should be the original file from the manufacturer or supplier, marked up as needed. It should not be a copy of a scan of a fact. Routing forms, suppliers, letters, and scans of copies of faxes are not permitted within COBie Forms. Keep it simple when using COBie. Each file should stay in its marked up format and linked into the COBie form. So let's see how this is done in an example. It was based on one large PDF file. It was over 600 pages. It had lots of different content. I started by making one separate subdirectory for each COBie form so I wouldn't lose track of the files. When I split the large file into smaller files, I named each of the parts of the content by the product's model number. This system worked well for me, but you might find one that suits you better. Regardless of how you organize your submittal files, if you set it up beforehand, you can get pretty quick, as you'll see when we proceed. As you might guess, using COBie Forms for the submittals themselves is preferred to coming back after the fact. One final lesson learned. Make a backup of the original COBie form you'll be using in case you want to return to that original file. So regardless of when you're completing your COBie form, let's start by adding the most important information on the form, the information about the manufacturer and supplier and model number in the product data file. Here's a redacted copy of the subcontractor's information about the split system air conditioning units used on this project. You can see that we know the type of product from the second row. We can also find the model number for each type of product on the third row. On our COBie form, the submittals required for each type of product are grouped together. The first line in this group is always the product data submittal. On the left side in gray is the information created automatically from the COBie file based on the design. On the right side in yellow is a place for the manufacturer, the model number, and the product data. On the right side in yellow is the place for the manufacturer, the model number, the product data file, and the supplier. To add the manufacturer, we simply select their name from the list of manufacturers that COBie already knows about when the form was generated. If this is the first time you're using a COBie form, then the manufacturer might not be on the list, and if that's the case, you can add it. To get our manufacturer on the list, we go to the Company tab at the bottom of the spreadsheet. In our example, we're showing you how to do this from scratch. For your project, the Company tab may already be filled out. Here's the blank sheet used to capture the manufacturer and supplier. If you had a COBie file listing all of the manufacturers ahead of time, this information would already be here. To add the company, we identify the category of the company as manufacturer or supplier, then we fill out the remaining set of information. Let's consider for just a second how capturing this information here during the submittal process will keep you and everyone else later in the project from ever having to look it up again. For now, we'll return to the Transmittal Form tab by clicking that tab and selecting the name of the company from the drop-down list. As the other products in the form already use the same companies, we can also pick their name from the list. When we added the manufacturer, we also added the supplier, so they can be selected from the list. We also identify the supplier for the second type of equipment since it's also coming from the same source. Now let's add the model number for each of these products into the COBie form. Start by looking back on the submittal document, and we can see that the model number is the third row of the table. We can copy that information so we don't make a mistake transcribing it and then paste it into the COBie form. We paste the model number into the field just to the right of the manufacturer's name as shown here. To complete the product data information required by the COBie formatted transmittal form, we only need to list the file name that contains the product information. So on our COBie form, you can see that the name of the file goes just to the right of where we pasted in the model number. You could type the name of the file, but it's not really necessary. If you highlight the name of the file and wait a second, Windows will highlight the name of the file for you. Then you can copy it. Returning to the COBie form then, the file name can just be pasted in the proper cell as shown here. You'll want to check the full file name using the word wrap formatting feature to ensure you pasted in the right file. And you want to make sure that the file extension is also there. So now let's put in the second product type. Here it is on the underlying submittal document. We can copy the model number and returning to the COBie form, just paste it in where it needs to go, and we can do the same with the file name as before. It may be the case that the information in the design is not exactly the same as the information needed for construction. One example of this is when new types are added during construction. So let's see how this works with our COBie form. In our example product data, there is indeed a new type. We have a second kind of indoor unit. We know that the submittal requirements for that new type of product are exactly the same as the one we have already created. So we can begin by highlighting the existing one and then copying those rows, as shown here. To make sure we're clear that these are new submittals not originally identified by the contract, we can add the item number of new in each of these rows. Now, we can proceed here as as if nothing ever was different. We select the manufacturer and supplier from the list. We can edit the file name to ensure it's referencing the correct file. And finally, we copy and paste the model number from the product data into the COBie form. Now we can link the remainder of the PDF files we separated earlier into our COBie form. We'll start at the top of the list and proceed. We have 3 files for installation manuals, 1 for each type. Now let's return to the COBie form and see where they go. When we look at the list of files required for design submittals, we see that there is not a submittal required for installation instructions. I'm sure anyone familiar with contract admin will know what's required by design and what's available for submittals may not always match. So let's see how to add these files into our form. We know we have 1 of each of these new documents for every type. So the first step is to insert a new row for each one of these documents. Then we can change the item number to be new, and we select the relevant submittal type from the list. Now we add the description of the file as installation instructions, and we can paste the file name into the cell for attached file. Rather than retype the information for each of these new submittals, we can just copy it and change the file name. So let's do that. Here I highlighted the row and right-clicked to copy, and then I pasted the information in the other 2 rows. Next, I turned on word wrap so I could see the whole file name and corrected the file name for the first copied row, and here I changed the file name for the second copied row. For someone that's familiar with spreadsheets, it actually takes longer to explain this process than to actually do it. So let's return to the next batch of submittal files to see how they link into our COBie form. Submittals for manufacturer's certificates of compliance are already on the submittal form. So all we need to do is paste the file name into the cell for that existing submittal. Since those are done, let's take a look at the next batch of files. So here we have the manufacturer's drawing submittals. Where do we place them on our COBie form? There appear to be no specific place to put those, so we can add a new row, and because we're going to need it again, we can paste that new row into each of the other 2 products. So now the only thing we have to do is change the file name so that the files provided in the submittal package match. And again, you don't have to type anything, just copy the file name and extension into the proper place on the COBie form. Now let's return to the next batch of submittal files and link those in. Here are the next set. On the form, we see that these are already listed as submittals, so our job is pretty easy. As before, we simply copy and paste the file names from Windows Explorer. What I did to make it even easier and faster was copy and pasted the first file name into each of the 3 places, and then manually corrected the file name because the only difference has 2 letters in the model number. Now let's return to the next batch of submittal files. Our next set of files are pre-commissioning forms that apply to all 3 of our products. So far what we've seen are individual files for each type. These files apply to all 3. So let's see how we do that in the COBie form. Well, the first thing I found out when I tried to add these was that there were no commissioning documents listed on the submittal register. So I had to add 3 new rows, 1 for each of these documents. Next, I looked at the list of submittal types and found that our COBie basic file did not have types of submittals related to commissioning. So rather than pick an incorrect category, I decided to update the category list. You can do that too in a COBie form. That's because the Pick tab contains all the values for the pick lists on all the forms. So I went to the Pick List tab and looked for the row called Pick Submittal Type, then added a new pick for commissioning, and the information you see here is not sorted, so it might be hard to find. I was careful to sort just the selected data in this set of Excel information so that the other picks were not changed. Then I returned back to the basic form itself, and the new picks were on the list. So I picked it for each of the 3 new documents and added new as their item number. Then added a description of the contents of the document and provided the file names. Since those exact same file names applied to both of the other 2 types, I just pasted the 3 rows under the other 2 types. Now let's go back to our next batch and see how we process those. You notice that we've already identified these original technical specification files as product data, so we could have skipped them. There might, however, be times when a document can be used for more than one purpose, and it might be important for the facility manager to have that information listed again. And there's no harm should you wish to do this, so let's just do it as an example. So I added a new row for the first type, and then selected the type of submittal, and then added the description of the file and the file name, And finally, I pasted this row under the other two types and updated the file name to match the appropriate file for each of those types. So now let's return to our next batch of submittals and link those into the COBie form. The next document is the warranty, and this applies to all three of our types. Since the warranty certificate submittal is already listed on our COBie form, we can paste the name of the file into the three corresponding slots. Warranty, however, is a unique case because the owner also needs to know who to call in case of warranty problems. You might have noticed that you can pick the warranty company from the list if you know who it will be. Since I did not know, and because the information can be captured later in the process on another COBie form, I left it blank. If you know the information when you make your original warranty submittal, you can certainly select and add the company as needed. So let's go back to our list and look at the next batch of files. We're down to the last two files, and these only apply to two of the three types. So we add the new row and the file name, and then copy that row down to the other, and then update the file name to match the new type. While we've completed adding each of the files, there's almost always a difference between what's on the submittal register and what's delivered on the project. So let's take a look at that. Sometimes there's a change because one file could pertain to multiple submittals. Other times it's because of the types of information that are available. It's often the case that the complete list of submittals covers later phases of a project. So now let's finalize our file by cleaning out the blank rows as appropriate. The rows listed here are rows of information that we don't have yet. Rather than leave the rows blank, let's find out if we've already got that information in an existing file. For example, we know some of the files provided by the manufacturer are fairly large and that they contain several different kinds of information. If we find a blank row in a COBie form and have the data in one of these existing files, we can add that file name to the existing row. In this example, we opened the O&M manual and looked to see if it actually had the requirements for any of the other submittals. Here are some emergency operating instructions that might be helpful. So we linked the file into that row on the COBie form. If we want it to be really helpful to the facility manager, we might also see that knowing where the troubleshooting information is important. So I created a separate new line item in the submittal form. It was pretty easy to do since the file was already listed. I just made a new copy of that row and then changed the item number to new and changed the name of the submittal to troubleshooting. You certainly didn't have to do this, but think about how little time it takes you to do it at the start of the job versus the time required for a mechanic to find this information when they need it. Here's another important section of the O&M manual. Rather than delete the blank row for maintenance instructions, we can add these instructions here. At this point, if we have submittal rows but don't have corresponding information, we can delete the rows. So that leaves us with the final step of packaging the information. Packaging is simply done by putting the completed COBie form and the referenced files into one single zip file. Rename the zip file as the name of the COBie form and then send in the zip file. If you happen to have multiple COBie forms of the same name, then add something else to the end of the file name to make sure that each zipped submission is a different file. Now that you've seen a detailed example about how I created a COBie form on a real project, let's take a moment and step back. You have seen that the COBie form is just an interactive version of the paper form required on every job. You've also seen that if you organize your files ahead of time based on the original manufacturer files and not copies of scans of faxes, then that information can be delivered as submittal data and reduce your work when it comes to collecting all this information at the end of the job. The specific COBie form we looked at captures not only the submittal data but also the manufacturer, supplier, and model number. I hope you found this video helpful as you start using COBie forms. Thanks for joining me today.